What's up, guys? Funk with you, and today we're taking a look at my top 10 nonfiction books that I want to read and will soon. Feel free to drop your thoughts down in the comments. I'm starting this out with number 1, The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert. This one argues that Earth is in the midst of a modern human-caused extinction. The author chronicles previous extinction events and relates them to things that are happening in our current age. She received the Pulitzer Prize for general nonfiction for the book in 2015, and it's certainly true that humans are damaging the earth and that our natural resources are dwindling. Much of the world is already in crisis, and it won't be long before first world countries are experiencing the impact of all of this. I don't know much about this subject, and that's what's really drawn me in for this one, my desire to understand the issues. The author has done a lot of writing about ecosystems. She's won more than a handful of awards, and she's become an expert writer on the environment, so I think that this is going to be an interesting and impactful read for me. Nonfiction book number 2. Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst by Robert Sapolsky. Have you ever wondered to yourself, why did I just do that? Or have the actions of others left you similarly puzzled? Finding out why humans do the things we do is difficult. We are complex beings, and there's no one area of science that explains why we act in the manner we do. In Behave, Sapolsky adopts an interdisciplinary scientific approach to explain human behavior on both the scales of the individual and whole societies. He elaborates on genes, hormones, brains, psychology, group dynamics, and much more in a massive piece that explains human actions. The author is a smart guy. He's a neuroendocrinologist and professor of neuroscience at Stanford University, and I saw him give a TED Talk on this book that very much so intrigued me. The author seems to be extraordinarily knowledgeable about human behavior, and the ratings for this thing are off the chain. It gets a 4.4 on Goodreads, and I know that when I finish this one, I'll have learned something about myself and humankind in general. Leave it to me to bring a Stephen King book into my nonfiction adventures. Number 3, On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft by Stephen King. Part memoir, part masterclass by one of the best-selling authors of all time, this one gives us a personal look at the life of Stephen King, and it's an instructional covering the basic literary techniques that a writer must know. King is my favorite writer, and although I've read dozens of his books, I've never read a biography on him. However, I know that he has led an interesting life. He grew up in poverty. He struggled with cocaine and alcohol, and he overcame those things. Not only am I interested in Stephen King's life, but I have wanted to write some short stories for a long time, and I really don't know what to do. So I think that I won't only enjoy the memoir side of this, but hopefully it teaches me what I need to know to finally write my first short story. Number 4, Leonardo Da Vinci by Walter Isaacson. Da Vinci was a polymath and is widely considered as one of the most diversely talented people to have ever lived. He was a painter, a mathematician, an architect, an engineer, and a conceptual genius. Walter Isaacson is a journalist, an author, and a professor who is well known for his biographies on historical personalities, including Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, Henry Kissinger, Benjamin Franklin, and of course, Leonardo da Vinci. I read his Benjamin Franklin, An American Life, and had a great experience with that one. I thought it might be a little dull, but historically worth it. The book turned out to be a great read, and in it, he painted a picture of Benjamin Franklin that was both vivid and surprising. I think it's going to be fun reading about Leonardo da Vinci's life, and because of how much I enjoyed Walter Isaacson's book on Benjamin Franklin, it's his biography on Da Vinci that I'm electing to read. Number 5, The First World War by John Keegan. I have read quite a few books on the Second World War, from general histories to atrocities such as Auschwitz-Birkenau, and it's become clear to me that to understand why the Second World War happened, you have to have background concerning the First World War. Millions of people, soldiers and civilians alike, lost their lives during the First World War, and new technologies and weapons were developed that led to more destruction than any war previous to that one. John Keegan was a military historian and a lecturer who wrote many books on the nature of combat between prehistory and the 21st century, including air, land, and naval operations, as well as the psychology of battle. I think that after I read this book, I'll have a better understanding of history in general, and I'll have a better perspective on any World War II books that I read in the future. Number 6, The Society of the Mind by Marvin Minsky. In this one, the author constructs a model of human intelligence step by step, built up from interactions between simple parts called agents, which he says themselves are mindless. He describes these interactions as constituting a society of the mind, and hence the title of the book. Minsky was a cognitive and computer scientist largely concerned with artificial intelligence. He was the co-founder of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's AI laboratory and the author of many books concerning artificial intelligence and philosophy. I came across a lecture that he gave on psychology, and I think that he was an interesting and well-learned person. He was quite respected and accomplished, having received the prestigious Turing Award, along with many other awards and nominations. I enjoy reading psychology and philosophy from a range of different perspectives, and I'm looking forward to Minsky's take on the mind. Number 7, Two Who Survived: Keeping Hope Alive While Surviving the Holocaust by Rose and Max Schindler. This one chronicles the true story of two children from different worlds, a young man from the city named Max and a country gal named Rose. When the persecution of the Jews began in Nazi Germany, both were taken from their homes and thrust into concentration camps. I watched one of the authors, Rose Schindler, on a podcast called the Jocko Podcast, ran by a man named Jocko Willink. During the show, Jocko both read from the book and interviewed Rose, and it was a very dramatic, troubling, inspiring interview. I have read a half dozen or more memoirs and history books on Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's a historical subject that I continue to investigate, and these things can be very powerful reads. They can be very moving and haunting, but I think it's important to remember what people like Rose and Max Schindler went through. It never ceases to shock me when I read an Auschwitz book concerning human nature and what we can be capable of. I think it's a way to honor people like Rose by reading their stories, and I think that World War II is an important thing to study in general. Number 8, Choke: The Untold Story of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil by Roberto Pedreira. I began rolling Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu about 6 months ago, and it's something that's been a lot of fun for me. It's something that I've become passionate about, and I think that I'll continue on with the love of jiu-jitsu for the rest of my life. So naturally, I've become interested in the history and development of the sport during the mid-1800s and early 1900s in Brazil. The author made use of the Brazilian National Library to write an encompassing, authoritative account of the sport, from pre-jiu-jitsu martial arts to the foundation of jiu-jitsu to jiu-jitsu's role in modern mixed martial arts. I've heard it said that this one can be a bit dense and that it's not for the casual reader, but I'm quite certain that I have the determination to get through it. Number 9, Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Fates of Human Societies by Jared Diamond. This one is a Pulitzer Prize-winning historical book that I have heard referenced so many times. The story begins 1,300 years ago when hunter-gatherers ruled the earth, and Diamond talks about how the developmental paths of human societies on different continents began to diverge. He talks about the influence of food, writing, technology, government, and religion, as well as germs and weapons of war. He covers adventures on land and sea, societies invading one another, and the spread of deadly diseases. I'm not the most well-read guy on history, but I have read some history books, and it's always an illuminating experience. No two history books share the same perspective. Even if I read two of them on the same subject, each will have unique insights, and I find history quite engrossing. With all the acclaim and all the recommendations that I've got for Guns, Germs, and Steel, it would be hard for me to pass this one up. And finally, guys, number 10, China, A History by John Kia. I have decided that I'm going to start familiarizing myself with countries and cultures around the world that I've always been curious about by reading a book on them. This one covers primarily from 200 BCE up to the start of the 20th century, which incorporates the Han, Tang, Song, Ming, and Qing dynasties. It also includes information on the very first dynasty in China, the Xia, which reigned from 2070 to 1600 BCE, and it also covers the influence of Chairman Mao and the People's Republic of China. China is in East Asia. It's a massive geological body and is the world's most populous country with around 1.5 billion people. Its history is rich with science, art, politics, and philosophy, and it's going to be enjoyable for me finally familiarizing myself with it. Well, there you have it, guys. My top 10 nonfiction books that I want to read and will soon. I'm looking forward to reviewing these things. Let me know in the comments if you have a nonfiction recommendation for me. Thanks for dropping by. I'll see you next time.